All right, I'm Matthew Donahue,
I'm Samari Wakimoto.
And I'm Marina Sellers.
and we are Section AH. We are presenting on kelp forests and climate change on the West Coast. Kelp forests are the glue that holds global and local environments, societies, and economies in place. They provide a wide array of ecosystem services that all depend on. However, ocean warming threatens the future of kelp forests across the West Coast as it stunts growth and disturbs auto relationships that kelp rely on for survival. This project explores the interconnected relationships between kelp forests, climate change, our economies, and our society, as well as solutions to preserve these ecosystems moving into the future.
So, threats to kelp on the West Coast and environmental aspects are marine heat waves and global warming, and this is a direct cause. So, on the West Coast last year, kelp cover decreased by 50% during the marine heat waves, limiting their temperature tolerance and pushing overgrowth of toxic algae. Continuing intensity of heat waves each year will further threaten kelp forest regeneration, and this will negatively impact the species and biomes surrounding its growth. An indirect cause is interactions between species and food webs that have been changed a little bit. So as fish migrate towards cooler waters as a result of ocean warming, interactions with species that are already established in their desired area emerge, and this often causes overgrazing of kelp due to these invasive species. And kelp forest serves in benefiting the ocean in many ways. It provides habitat, supplies a food source for many invertebrates, and works for preventing coastal storms from reaching waterfronts. And beyond this, it removes pollutants in water, filters excess nutrients, and absorbs carbon.
And then as far as economic losses due to the loss of kelp, there's disruption of fishing industries and tourism and public health issues. So without kelp, fish populations are more susceptible to prey populations and are at greater risk of pollution intake and excessive CO2 levels. Or in simple terms, with less fish to catch, fishermen will have less fish to sell for profit. And then as far as tourism and public health issues, kelp forests are popular attractions for tourists, so the loss of them can negatively affect tourism, especially in coastal areas. With kelp populations depleting, more carbon is being released into the atmosphere, where it can have harmful effects on human health and the health of the foods we rely on. In general, kelp sequesters carbon, so with less kelp, there's less carbon being sequestered. And then as far as benefits to the economy from kelp, kelp forests themselves can also be harvested to be sold as a nutrient-rich matter in order to aid soil productivity and as an ingredient in shampoos, foods, and pharmaceuticals. Local Washington companies can benefit from the use of kelp as a locally harvested and organic ingredient, attracting consumers to its originality and benefit. And as discussed in our solutions, kelp forests can also be harvested for food products.
And then as kelp forests relate to the society, they have a large impact on heritage and culture as West Coast communities rely on kelp forests to sustain recreational activities like fishing with fish populations and surfing with wave dampening. And this also relates to indigenous tribes as well that relate or rely on kelp for sustain their well-being and culture. As they rely as fishing communities, they rely closely on the health of the ocean and kelp forests particularly. And societies also rely on kelp forests for their ecosystem services, coastal and global communities alike. They depend on kelp forests for climate change protections, particularly coastal communities with buffering of storm fronts and sea level rise, and global communities with mitigation of climate change and its impacts with carbon sequestration. And then coastal and global communities also depend on kelp as a source of food and revenue. However, all these services are at risk amidst kelp loss. So some solutions to kelp forest deforestation would be mitigation of urchin overpopulation and overgrazing during warming events, as urchin overgrazing is the largest threat to kelp forest health amidst warming events. Another solution that ties into this would be preservation of kelp forests and sea otters by restricting human interaction, as fishing and other human activities can disturb the relationships between otters, urchins, and kelp. Where kelp farms can be used as a method of regenerative aquaculture and can produce food products. Expansion of kelp farms would also help to preserve kelp forests moving into the future, especially the ecosystem services, economic and environmental that they provide. And another solution which would fund such a system would be the expansion of the blue carbon credit system, which is a carbon credit system which funds restoration of coastal wetlands, as this would incentivize and fund kelp farming. And then the final solution would be involving indigenous West Coast tribes to practice traditional aquaculture around kelp forests, as traditional ecological knowledge being intertwined into legal systems and into ecosystem restoration has proved very effective in solutions that restore the environment and its ecosystem services. So all these solutions would help to preserve kelp forests moving into the future, as well as bring about other benefits such as sustaining of food and economies, and with traditional ecological knowledge, in encouraging indigenous justice and representation in ecological work.